Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner. I'm a critic, consultant, and programmer based in Toronto, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guest this week is Bryn Chainey, a writer and director who's been making strange, compelling shorts for the last decade and a half, including Kill Your Dinner, The Father of Rodents, and the beguiling Moritz and the Woodfuss. His first feature, Rabbit Trap, stars Dev Patel and Rosie McEwen as a 1970s couple who moved to Wales to experiment with rural sound engineering and inadvertently opened something that should have remained sealed. It's newly available on digital and on demand in the US and Canada, and it's a weird, rich, beguiling modern folktale. Perfect Halloween viewing, really. Bryn picked Whistle and I'll Come to You, Jonathan Miller's 1968 adaptation of an M.R. James ghost story starring Michael Hordern as an academic whose entire world collapses, or maybe it expands, when he blows a curious pipe he finds in an ancient cemetery. Produced for the BBC documentary series Omnibus, it's a remarkably stylish, almost experimental piece that initiated, almost accidentally, a tradition of televised ghost stories. The British like theirs at Christmas time, but like I said, it's Halloween. And this is Someone Else's Movie.
Whistle and I'll Come to You starts with this very strange narration, right? It's actually the director's voice. And he sets up what the film is. And I think it has a really direct overlap with what I'm interested in, or what I was interested in with Rabbit Trap, which was presenting what happens to us when we are presented with forces within ourselves and maybe forces in the world or within the world that are beyond our rational understanding, that break our fundamental the fundamental architecture of how we see ourselves in the world, and Whistle and I'll Come to You does that so in such an efficient, austere, sparing way. And I just think it's a really spooky, philosophically interesting film. And it's not very well known. I would love more people to know about Whistle and I'll Come to You. I mean, it was directed for a TV show that usually showed documentaries about culture, and occasionally they had kind of narrative retellings of parts of the documentary. And this was maybe I think it was the first time they did a full fiction piece. And so they presented it as a slightly docu-fiction kind of, with an atmosphere that this might be a retelling of a real event. And there's something very eerie and strange about it. And it deserves to be seen by a lot of people, I think. A lot of people will enjoy this movie, particularly on a windy, dark night. They can wrap up, under their blankets and light some candles and put this on and enjoy its kind of. I don't want to call it a cozy film because it's a very cold film, but it is intimate. It takes place in a little holiday village, in the English countryside. So there is something almost cozy about it. It's cozy adjacent,
Yeah.
What did you think of this film? Was this your first time hearing about it?
I was aware of it. My wife is English. I should start with that. So she is well aware of the tradition of ghost stories for Christmas that, as far as I know, never made it out of England. Certainly the US and Canada, all the ghost stories are for Halloween. And it's
right.
She did explain it to me at one point, and it just seemed incongruous at best that an entire country expects to have a spooky story at Christmas. I mean, yes, Christmas Carol, obviously the Scrooge story is a ghost story in its essence, but it's more fantastical and joyful. It doesn't feel like horror, except, here and there with the Ghost of Christmas Future. And I was aware of a bunch of them because they relaunched the Ghost Story for Christmas. Mark Gatiss, I think, is the one behind it these days.
Mark Gatiss, yeah.
Gatiss, sorry.
Yeah. That was back in I think 2010. They started that again.
Yeah, and it's delightful because they're playful and they're sinister and they are cozy. They're very, especially the early ones, because you couldn't really terrify people on television. There was a sense of propriety to them, but that just meant
Mm.
people found ways to creep out their viewer in non-explicit fashion,
Yeah.
right? And I had seen clips of this somewhere, probably in a documentary about the Christmas ghost stories, but this was the
Mm.
first time I'd actually sat down and watched it. And suddenly it unlocked a whole bunch of stuff in modern English cinema, or British cinema specifically. I mean, Joanna Hogg and I had a long conversation about The Eternal Daughter and the things she was leaning on, which are,
Mm.
Powell and Pressburger and her love of I Know
Yep.
Where I'm Going, and the sort of casual, cozy,
Mm-hmm.
paranormal things that are happening around there. But
Yep.
watching this, it's just like, shit, there's 20 minutes of this movie that are The Eternal Daughter that she leaned on very heavily, and she
Correct.
didn't
Yeah.
mention it at
Just
all.
that's true. Yeah, it's funny because I saw Eternal Daughter I think on a plane a few months ago, and
Mm.
I've seen Whistle and I'll Come to You a bunch of times, and I didn't clock it in the moment, but um it did feel very much like a throwback to a certain kind of how did you put it? Like you used the word polite or
Oh,
propriety or
yeah.
something, a certain kind of polite, a sort of a polite chiller,
Mm-hmm.
where there is kind of a haunting aspect to being English and being out in the landscape. I think there's something very particularly strange about being English because you are part of a culture that is built on politeness and social gestures, and there are ways of doing things. I don't. That's true in like kind of posh circles, like the characters in Eternal Daughter, where there's a way of doing things. We must. Don't say that. You don't use your spoon that way. There's that people, but there's also people like me who grew up just kind of working class, normal kind of English. There are still all these unspoken rules, these ways of you're meant to behave, and it is all of that is meant to lead you towards kind of a coziness where you're meant to have cups of tea, stay inside, and we're all familiar with each other and familiar with how things are meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
But we live in this country that is quite unforgiving, most of it, that you go to the seaside and you're cold, and there's no sand, there's rocks, and the cliffs are crumbling and the houses are falling into the sea, and everything feels haunted and decayed and possessed in a way. And that kind of incongruity is, I think, what those films like Whistle and I'll Come to You and Eternal Daughter and I Know Where I'm Going as well, I think has that kind of feeling of the landscape being at odds with the way that English culture has set itself up. And it's for me with Rabbit Trap, I mean, I wanted to I find that all very fascinating, and I wanted with Rabbit Trap to play on that a bit, to do what Whistle and I'll Come to You does, where the landscape has a consciousness of some kind or has its own personality, and it's not, it doesn't totally jive with the way that we have set ourselves up as rational beings in this world, or set ourselves up as with the illusion of being in control of it all. The landscape will come in with a particularly cold wind and come in with, the cliff will start to crumble under your feet and say, no, 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 you were never in charge of this place. You thought you built your society on me, but it's just balancing. You're just balancing on me very precariously, and I can shake you off, and I will shake you off when I'm done with you. I think that's a kind of a feeling I love about these landscape horror, which I hope Rabbit Trap can fit into that kind of pocket of cinema.
Yeah, there is something. I can't remember if it was. I must have been Joanna. I'm not that well versed in the literature, but she had said something about how these are the stories where people, a traveler arrives and they're given shelter and soup and tea and a big blanket, and then left in a room, and the Wicker Man is just outside. Like you're treated
Mm.
beautifully right up until you're sacrificed, and even then, it's very apologetic, but it's going to happen. And that
Uh,
implies a
yeah.
human agency even there, right? Because the people doing the sacrificing are performing the rituals and appeasing the gods and they can convince themselves that, the harvest will be great next year because of what we're doing, but it's still an illusion. Mm-hmm. It's just people desperately trying to pretend they're in control. Even, Whistle and It'll Come to You is so minimalist that the only transgression of Professor Parkin, if he is in fact transgressing, is that he shows up where he probably isn't wanted and then blows a whistle he probably shouldn't blow. That's it.
Right. But that's the only act. And but what I think his great transgression is the hubris that he's brought to this landscape. Yeah, and I think it presents, Whistle and I'll Come to You presents a version of, or an image of England where your actions don't have to, like, your actions don't give you away. Your soul does. It's given away pretty quickly. The landscape can read you. The elements, the weather, it reads you inside out. And I think that film does that so beautifully. Actually, I remember when I wrote down anyone who goes and watches the movie will hear this, but I wrote down the opening narration. I wanted to talk about it with you because I just think it's so fun. Like, it starts off with the director's voice, and it's got this kind of the tone of the recording of the voice has got a slight crackle to it, and it was obviously recorded on magnetic tape, and there's a slight wackle to it, so it feels kind of haunted already, his voice, and it's got this formality which makes you believe you're about to watch something academic, and he just, first of all, he introduces that. He said, what is it? He says, this is a tale of the supernatural. It's the work of a man who wrote ghost stories as a sideline. And then he explains about the author, who was a professor at Cambridge.
M.R. James.
M.R. James, yeah. And he says, he's best known for his ghost stories, all of which have a peculiar atmosphere of cranky scholarship. The darkest of them is called Whistle and I'll Come to You. It's the story of solitude and terror, and it has a moral too. It hints at the dangers of intellectual pride and shows how a man's reason can be overthrown when he fails to acknowledge the forces within himself which he simply cannot understand. I love that the movie puts it right up front, because that allows us to enjoy 20 minutes of just a man going on holiday, and we get to enjoy all the eccentricities of this bumbling is maybe the wrong word, but this, he's a comic character, Professor Parkin, right?
Well, even his name is a bit silly, right?
Professor Parkin. And he sort of mumbles to himself as he walks around this holiday house, and he sort of, bring my bags in. He's like, some sort of dog, so grapefruit, some haddock, he's this kind of, he's almost cartoonish, but because the narrator set up that this is a man of pride, this is a proud man, I think that's such a powerful device that they did, because you're seeing this almost childlike, eccentric, clearly very lonely man, a man who has spent way too much time alone, to the point where he has either forgotten how to engage socially or doesn't care anymore. And we're watching him thinking, oh shit, you're gonna get yours at some point. But it takes a while to actually see the pride, because he doesn't say anything hugely proud. It's just the way he engages with topics that are beyond his comprehension. He shuts them down quickly and laughs at them, and just to himself. He's not a cruel man, but he's an arrogant man. And I don't know, what did you make of the character? What did you think of this guy?
I think at this point in time, we would describe him as on the spectrum, right? Like he's a parody of an academic, but he has no social skills, no social graces. And maybe he never had them, or he's just moved past them. I agree. He's incredibly lonely and isolated, even before we understand that. Michael Hordern is so, is it Hordern or Horden? I've never figured out the pronunciations.
They both sound good to me.
Right? It could be Horden. It's all that Worcester thing.
Either way, I wouldn't say the R anyway. I would say Michael Hordern.
So there you go. He's completely out of his element from the moment we meet him. And maybe he always was. But it gives the tensions of him interacting with staff and with the other people at dinner. He immediately shoves himself to the end of the table, won't be anywhere near other people, sits alone and
Mm-hmm.
fusses and grumbles at his food, as if the haddock has offended him somehow.
Mm.
It's someone who is so completely in his own head that the rest of the world may as well not exist, which I think is why the element of tragedy plays in so well in the story, in that he could just be,
Mm-hmm.
he could be a Professor Quatermass, like just a sort of aggressive investigator who, as soon as these things start happening, rushes into them and tries to figure out what's going on. Or he could be absolutely
Mm.
terrified. And instead, he's neither, which is so fascinating. He doesn't know how to react. He doesn't understand what he's experiencing and tries to process it, but
Mm-hmm.
intellectually, which is absolutely not going to help him.
Well, he's cultivated precisely one framework for the world, which is um, scholarly, kind of to analyze the situation and to sort of play around with the words of it. There's this scene at the breakfast table one morning where there's this old colonel, and the colonel asks, do you believe in ghosts? And our guy, Professor Parkin, goes, "Well, I'm never quite sure what people expected me to believe when they say a ghost. When you say ghost, do you mean the persistence of the human, the survival of the human personality, or something else, And he gives the illusion that he's trying to explain his position so that he doesn't have, so that he can intellectualize away the possibility of a ghost. But he ends up talking in a circle that answers precisely nothing. It's just flipping a word upside down and back to front, and then feeling as though he's achieved something, you know? And that result, the climax of that scene is the colonel quoting Hamlet when he says, "There is more in heaven than earth than in your philosophy." And Parkin says, "Well, I like to think there's more in philosophy than in heaven and earth." And then he sort of laughs to himself for about 30 seconds before the scene finishes. And he's said absolutely nothing. He's just taken a statement and turned it inside out and thought, well, that's the end of it. I don't have to actually engage. And I don't know. I find him a tragic figure, like you said. I think he's tragic. There is but he's also comic. He's comic and he's tragic. I'm kind of happy that he gets his mind blown by a ghost, because you see, this is absolutely what needs to happen to this kind of person. That the reality of, if there is something beyond the veil in this world, I think it should blow the minds of people who absolutely don't believe in it. They shouldn't be able to, well, they're not able to integrate it, and it's quite pleasurable to watch that happen. Um, as someone like myself who is open to there being other forces in the world, I'm not. I haven't encountered them myself, but I'm very interested, and I just wouldn't be so sure of myself. I don't know. I try to move through the world without a concrete world, like a complete yes or no on what the edges of reality are. I kind of want reality to show its own edges.
Yeah. I mean, I would love
Yeah, I don't
there
know.
to be evidence of something, because then that would mean there is something. But I don't know. I think I suspect that we are really, really good at making up our own myths and legends, that we don't need the world to do it for us anymore. That we've maybe
Mm,
extinguished. There are a series of books out there about magic dying in the world, and I think it's starting to creep into cinema.
mm,
And it's a larger cynicism about where we're headed and what's going on with all of us. And that stuff
yeah.
resonates with me, that there's less to believe in these days. But that's our own
Mm.
failing. It's not the world's. But I'm a cynic.
You're a cynic. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, I was gonna say, how do you feel about books and art and films that don't um, present an entirely rational world?
Oh, those are fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and why do you think that is? And what place do you think they have?
Well, I think I only recently learned, because I'm ignorant of most things, that the word mundane used to simply refer to the world itself, things of the world. Mundi from the Latin.
Right. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that it didn't mean boring or dull or provincial. It just meant earthly.
Mm.
And I love the idea. I mean, I grew up on science fiction and fantasy and voraciously read everything I could and watched movies I shouldn't have watched when I was a child, and had a wonderful excuse me, had a wonderful time doing it. But it
Yeah, it's
was
the absolute best. The
yeah,
forbidden films.
yeah, and discovering that there were people who saw the world that way, and that there were writers who specialized in the unknown and the indescribable. Lovecraft, for all of his horrible faults as a human being,
Hmm.
endures because he could conjure the level of horror that no one else could. The
Mm.
writers of every era, the ones we continue to read, the filmmakers who endure, are people of such phenomenal talent. I mean, a very good reason that we're getting another pair of Frankenstein movies in the next 6 months, right? That Guillermo delivers his,
Mm.
and then Maggie Gyllenhaal has her version of The Bride, and they're so elastic, and it's because there's so much in that original novel, in Mary Shelley's novel,
Hmm.
that you can build entire worlds out of it over and over and over again. Stuff never gets tired in that way, as long as you have someone who is sharp enough, smart enough, funny enough, weird enough to come up with a new take on it. You can reinvent anything. And I think that's why certain legends and myths are so resistant to adaptation as well. Why, there are always so many disappointing werewolf movies, because people need to show us the werewolf. And it's
Hmm.
never as interesting as the thing in our head. Almost never. There are some great ones, but for the
Yeah.
most part,
Those filmmakers capture also the smell and the taste and the mood of an event that's partly beyond intellectualizing a bit. And for me, I'm personally very interested in those kind of films where a filmmaker doesn't fully intellectualize the experience of the characters, or doesn't fully intellectualize and give kind of a socio-political context for everything, but they can also create the the strange atmosphere of an event or an experience that can only happen once to some very particular characters. And then if the film can capture that strange mood, then it goes in deep into a viewer. I love that kind of film that is smart, but also body smart, you know, where it's not all in the head, but it's in the senses. Because I think, for me, that's a really rich and important part of being on this planet, or being a human, is that there are things that happen to our bodies, um, that aren't that bypass the rational. And I would love a movie to capture that. And Whistling I'll Come to You, I think, is a come back to it, does that so fucking well. I don't know if you saw a high quality copy, or if you managed, or you watched it on YouTube.
I found it on the Internet Archive, and it seems to be the new restoration, at least the one that's on the BFI DVD.
Okay, beautiful, great. Yeah, I recommend anyone listening and they want to watch it to try to track down a really good scan of it, because it is beautifully shot. I mean, the cinematography it creates a sense of scale, of like bodies in a space, and then the way that the weather kind of penetrates fabric. You can feel it in the film.
Oh yeah.
Yes, and also how time breaks. I mean, there's a sequence where our guy, Professor Parker, has a nightmare, and even though it was shot on 16 mm film, they did something where they slowed down the processed film, and then they filmed it again. So you get this kind of janky, broken time where if it was done digitally, it would look probably pretty terrible. You'd get that awful kind of artificial slow motion, but on film, it's somehow it's something to do with the grain starting and stopping, and I'm not sure exactly why it works so effectively, but it does. Um, and it creates this real sense that not just perception of time is changing in that moment, but time itself is changing during this man's supernatural encounter. First in the dream, and then in the bedroom at the end, when his mind utterly breaks. Time slows down again, and his thumb comes into frame, and moves up to his mouth, and then he's sucking his thumb at the end, and his hair is standing up, and he just looks like a scared little boy, as though he's now been all the decades of his life of thinking and learning and researching and teaching and pontificating and all of that has just been rewound very quickly by this one encounter that's beyond the limits of his understanding, and he reverts, he devolves to being just a little boy sitting on the bed going, oh no, oh no. I love it. I mean, what an amazing oh no, oh no. I mean, what did you feel about that ending?
I really loved it. I was trying to put myself in the head of somebody watching it and I was shocked to find out this thing aired in May of 1968, not at Christmas. This was before the tradition existed. They just threw this at people.
On a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, I suppose it would be May. Is there a break week in there somewhere? Or there is now maybe for schools.
I don't know about that in the 60s, but yeah, I mean, I think children wouldn't have been watching Omnibus anyway. Omnibus was a very kind of prestigious kind of like, oh yes, we watch this because we like art and culture and documentaries and things. And then this comes on, and I think it was made for the kind of people who would see something of themselves in Professor Horden. So Professor
Parkin.
Parkin, played by Michael Horden. Go on.
Yeah,
you're trying to get in their headspace.
I was trying to figure out how people would have received it, and yeah, as you say, the cinematography, the editorial techniques, those are radical for 1968. I mean, Godard's doing things, and there are people making movies that are. I think Lejeté had already. Yeah, of course, Lejeté had already come out. There is a precedent for it, but not for a television audience in England in 1968. This is just something coming at them that they would not understand, which I think is why it was received as such a powerful horror work, when it's disquieting, but it's not terrifying in a contemporary sense. But again, the fun of these things is that you get to appreciate them as they would have appeared when they were first seen, and how they would have worked an audience over. And yeah, leaving him on the floor just muttering, oh no, oh no. It's ambiguous in a delicious way. And I hate the word delicious for art. Everybody's using it these days, but that is the only word for this, where you get to wonder when it's over, what does he mean? Is he in shock that the veil has been parted, that something else exists, and that he was completely wrong about the way the world works? Is he just terrified that he will be tormented forever by whatever this was? Is he confronting his own limitations? And all of them can be true, and maybe all of them are, but it's so ambiguous in its ending that you are just, I mean, I picture people just looking at each other when it ends and not knowing what to do other than turn the television off.
Right. I think, and there's a fourth option as well of what that oh no is. I view it as him trying desperately to close that door in his mind, to say no, oh no,
to reject it.
To try to reject it. And the very last frame is, he doesn't even get out the last no. It ends on a oh no, and it freezes the freeze frames, and he's closing his eyes, and it holds that for a little while. Then the credits roll, and I think that's it's almost presenting almost like a warning, to be like, don't do this, don't be this guy, where you are closing your eyes to if something is presented to you, don't push it down and don't close the door. You know. Maybe he can almost hear the director going like, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes indeed.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on shiny things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about the new releases of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, Weapons, and Eddington, as well as 4K releases of David Cronenberg's A History of Violence and Werner Herzog's Nosferatu the Vampire. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io, or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. The English have a specific love in their fiction of people who open doors and find things that they're not prepared to find. And I was just wondering if you see the same commonalities, or if that's just me as an outsider. noticing something.
Hmm. I don't know if it's particularly English or particularly British. I think that's a really good observation. It is something you're aware of if you grew up anywhere in the British Isles. You are aware that this land has been, if you're living in a house, like for example, when I wrote Rabbit Trap, I was living in a 500-year-old cottage in the woods,
Right.
and I knew that that house had been lived in by generations and generations of people. People have died in this house. I don't know how many, but some people would have died here. And you go to a church and it's 1,000 years old, and you can see graffiti that people have carved in. It's like 500 years ago, someone carved in, their name. And everywhere you go, there are these little reminders that you were not the first one here and you will not be the last one here. And there are these, I suppose all of those things are technology. I think kind of a summoning requires a technology, and um, you can use a spell, you can use a tape. You can record something and then play it back, or you can blow a flute that you found in a cemetery. And an instrument is a kind of technology to bring forth something. Um, and I think graffiti and like carvings in the earth are also technologies. And we have evidence of these technologies all through the UK. So maybe it's just being aware of those things creates that kind of story.
It's in Rabbit Trap too, right? I mean, you disturb the ring and you get what you get.
Big time. I mean, yeah, Rabbit Trap really kicks off with the same principle as Whistle and I'll Come to You. A character follows instead of blowing an instrument, he hears a strange sound in the woods and follows it, and then does something forbidden, which is records it, and then and he follows it all the way into a fairy circle. And once he steps inside, that's going through a portal or opening a door in a way, like you said. And I definitely like consciously put it in that tradition. But I think it probably way predates British ghost stories. I think that's all original myths and creation stories is, stepping through. And I do love a good walk. A good walk, like I heard once that a walk is just a couple of steps away from an adventure. You just step off the path a couple of directions. You just tread off the path and go, you trample into the woods, and an adventure's going to happen to you. And I think that's also a very British kind of phenomenon. You can go over we've got these walking trails. We have a right to roam all through the UK. There are like you can just walk through these farmyards and through woodlands, and those areas are getting more and more restricted, but you can just walk and trample through semi-wild places or places that are negotiating the boundaries of wild and domesticated. And you can step off that path into that liminal, not quite domestic, not quite wild anymore space. And that middle ground is where we all live in the modern world. There are no real wilderness spaces left anymore. But that liminal, awkward space where you're going to get stung by nettles and you might meet an adder, but you also might get yelled at by a farmer. It's that meeting of the worlds that is, I think, very interesting to me as a walker and a filmmaker and an English writer. Do you have that in Canada? Can you walk wherever you want?
Not quite. No, I mean, not at all, really, these days. There's lots of private land and lots of fencing, and it's a big country, but I think it's like 80 or 90% of us live within 100 miles of a US border. It's not all habitable in a way that
True.
that England is. And even, I mean, Wales and Scotland, you can build a house anywhere if you make the effort. Here, it's a
Pretty
lot
much.
harder the further north you go, and just hostile to human life generally. But my brother-in-law lives in Glossop, and he is a big walker and a birder, and just constantly tells us, sending us photographs of these strange tree arches and this beautiful light. And you absolutely see how people in this location in this part of the world can come up with additional histories in addition to the actual who did what when and who lived where. There is absolutely, I mean, I've driven through Wales, and it is downright eerie in places. There are valleys that seem to go down forever, and if you were just looking at them from a distance, you can easily imagine all sorts of things in the mist. A child could come out with stories of seeing all sorts of things. that then become the culture.
Yeah, I suppose so. That's the cynic's worldview of it. View of it. But yes, I like. I think that's
I prefer to think of it as academic.
my friend. There is more in this, more in heaven than earth in your philosophy. You know. Um, but yeah, I mean, absolutely. There is something. I mean, how lovely is that kind of landscape? You managed. I think you really nailed what's so particularly beautiful about the kind of landscapes that are presented in Whistle and I'll Come to You, and that I tried to present in
Mm-hmm.
Rabbit Trap is that we have these landscapes that are simultaneously really enticing and beautiful. Like there's no other word for it. You know, you're just taken by the light and by the flora, but then also a fog can roll in, and it can quickly transform into something a bit more eerie, and you feel suddenly that you're not supposed to be there, and it can kind of shift in and out of those kind of feelings, and it's I think very close to what people talk about the sublime being something that is beautiful yet terrifying. You know, like you are drawn towards something that you believe that may destroy you, and nature has that quality to it. And I think the British landscape has this particularly eerie, haunted quality in that you you can feel simultaneously invited and expelled by it, or warned by it. You know, you can come in, but be careful, or you know what I mean. And I love that kind of middle, kind of eerie place.
Was it difficult to get people on board with Rabbit Trap, with what it was going to be, what you needed it to be? Because it is in such easy conversation with all of this other established narrative, books and
Mm,
film and television, but it's also trying very consciously to be something new. It's set in 1976, before there is
mm,
quite so much access to technology, and they don't have resources. Your characters really are isolated and forced to
mm.
deal with whatever it is that's happening to them with whatever they have at
Yeah.
hand. And it's increasingly now we make movies about present day people who are forced to confront things, and they have all the resources to prove that they're having this experience and also that other things will work.
Mm.
But so much of
Yes.
this is just about two people trapped in a space not knowing what to do. And
Correct.
how do people
Yeah.
react to that as a pitch before you can actually see what it looks like?
Well, I didn't pitch this film to anyone other than sending it to the producers that I wanted, which was
Okay.
Spectre Vision, who had made Mandy and Girl Walks Home Alone at Night and Color Out of Space. You know, talking about Lovecraft.
Mm-hmm.
That I admired their work for a long time, and I only sent the project to them. It took a long time to get a contact, but once I did, they read it quickly and they got it. And there wasn't really, I didn't, with this film, I didn't want to have to convince anybody at the beginning, at least not my producers. Because yeah, it's it definitely does something different in that it leans into the the unexplainable or the mystery of an experience. I really wanted the character. I wanted the film to only explain as much as what the characters understand at any given time,
Mm-hmm.
which is very little. And I do want to do that consciously because, as a film lover myself, I fucking hate that scene in every fantasy or horror movie where the characters go to the library and pull off the shelf a book that explains, oh, this is the haunting that's happening, or alternatively, they might meet a neighbor or an old local who will tell them they'll do the exposition dump, and I always feel so insulted by that as someone that values the experience of the experience of an experience. I don't. I'm much more interested in the experience of an experience than the explanation of an experience. Um, and I wanted that with the film, and I think that actually makes the movie less of a horror film, and more of a kind of fable or a fairy tale. And that was from the beginning, that this is a story that involves fairy forces, and so I'm going to structurally make this more like a fairy tale. And but that's the harder thing throughout the process, because there were voices all the way along saying, shouldn't we explain a bit more, or shouldn't we have a moment where we explain, or to wrap things up neatly, this should really happen. But fairy tales are not interested in wrapping things up neatly. On fables and allegories and myths, they are more unwieldy, they're a bit more feral, kind of. They they don't they don't respect the rational mind only. They also want to present the world as a mysterious place and as a physical, experiential realm, you know? So
Yeah.
that was the harder thing. But luckily my producers were on board the whole time. Exposition and cause and effect and rationalism is definitely a thing that my film asks audiences to go off the track a little bit. You know, like I said about walk, you go over a country walk, you're gonna step into the weeds and you're gonna get stung a little bit. But like we don't know, we're in neither the woods nor the path. We're somewhere in the middle. And isn't that a rare place to be these days, especially in cinema, you know? And
Yeah.
it's really been a fight to have to maintain that. And it hasn't entirely paid off. I mean, half people fucking hate this movie because it doesn't do that. And half the people really are moved by it. And there have been interesting ways to meet us, interesting kind of markers of what kind of people are willing to go off the path and which ones aren't. And it's about personal experience and the way that you view the world and whether you've got some kind of, let's not, I don't want to like create the demographic of this movie.
I was going to ask though, have you noticed an age gap possibly? Because it seems to me that people who have, I'm in my 50s, but even people in their late 20s, early 30s, people who are the age of the characters and have started to question, what they want from relationships, what they want from family, what their future looks like. It feels like they would be the perfect audience to see this film and apply their own, again, the language of the supernatural applied to the mundane. Like this is what I'm talking about, this revolution that's going on in genre and not genre as well, where the language of these stories can inform and act as a support for simple human drama, which I'm finding increasingly are the movies that I'm most drawn to.
Explain that again for me in simpler terms.
Well, I think there are movies. There's a film called 40 Acres that opened just in the summer, but I premiered it at TIFF last year. It was an absolute pleasure to be able to book that one. It's a movie about a family of an ex-military couple. He's indigenous and she's black, are defending their family and their farmland from the white settlers, the raiders who keep coming and attacking them. And it's set in a post-collapse border space between Canada and America. It's probably Canada, but it's vague. And it is simply about people of color defending their land from the white people who want to take it away. And it is absolutely, literally not a metaphor. It is happening right in front of you, but it is using the dystopian near future setting to tell the story of the thing that happened hundreds of years earlier and how it's happening again. But if you watch it, it's a straight up Mad Max movie. It's just like there are no cars. It's all just people on foot. But you cannot get away from the fact that you are seeing something that is absolutely, basically a reenactment with different questions about the situation. It's great. It's a muscular, powerful, violent film, but it is also fully engaged with the history of both the US and Canada in a really, really clever way. Yeah, it's great. Director's name's R.T. Thorne. He's going to be a force going forward, I'm sure.
Cool.
And it's a tremendously entertaining movie, but it was really great to stand in front of an audience afterwards and have that Q&A. And it's like, let's talk about this. And RT's like, absolutely, let's talk about this. But in Rabbit Trap, right, we're seeing people presented with a situation that they didn't anticipate. And I'm going to be very vague about that because I don't want to spoil it for the audience. But it is also a very real, and like if you removed all the supernatural elements, that story still plays. The supernatural enhances it. And the thing about ghost stories, especially which I'll come to you now that I'm thinking about it, is that the supernatural, the really well done ghost story will have the supernatural element exacerbate the problems that are already there, right? Like the well-drawn character is the hook. We're watching someone lose his mind confronted with something he can't comprehend. But by the time that happens, we fully understand why he is the absolute wrong person to be confronting this thing.
Or the right person.
Yeah, I guess it depends on if you think he deserves it or not.
No, I think it's because it's about like it's a corrective that this his encounter with the supernatural is the way that the story presents it, I think, is
Mhm.
as a corrective in nature that you have this figure there are figures within the world who are um trampling over the dead. You know, he tramples through this cemetery, not because he disrespects the dead, but because he doesn't. He thinks that the dead are gone because there's nothing. You know, and I think it's he's the right person to have this experience of having his mind blown, because um, I don't know, like if you spend any time in the woods, you notice that there is a never-ending cycle of rotting and rebirth,
Sure,
and
of course.
I think there are certain forces in the woods that will speed up the composting process that needs to happen. And I think maybe in Whistling I'll Come to You, this ghoul, this specter, is a necessary force in this man's life to compost a worldview that is ultimately not serving him because he's alone, he's isolated, he's bumbling through life. He doesn't seem like a happy man. He seems like a tragic figure. And I don't know what happens after the movie ends, but whether his mind is blown and that's the end of it, or his mind is blown and then he can integrate um, more intellectual humility into his life. Maybe he will then have a chance of sitting at the table with some other people and eating a meal with them, or not just looking at a dog and going, "Oh, some sort of dog," but actually feeling the dog, feeling its fur, and letting it lick his face, and it, you know, to become a body again,
Mm.
a body in the world, and that's something I'm really uh, um, I feel strongly about, I guess. And I think I wanted to make a film where you cannot remove the supernatural element. I take issue with movies where anything outside of the human only functions as a metaphor for the human experience. Um, I find that a dangerous precedent if all of our culture does that, because we are absolutely destroying our planet. And I think it's partly because we've utterly separated ourselves from it, and
Mm.
we view the world only through our own eyes, through our own form and shape, you know? And everything has to, for me, that results in this thing where everything now has to be a metaphor for interpersonal dramas and socio-political things. And like, I love that those movies exist, and I really enjoy them, but I want there to be a little more room in our culture for stories that are about the earth and its mechanisms and its energy and its cycles, and the things that are anything that's beyond our just something that's beyond the human. And I wanted to try to present that in Rabbit Trap a little bit, is that there are characters who are faced with the non-human, and the non-human elements aren't just metaphors for the human. You know, maybe the human experience is a metaphor for the natural experience or for the non-human experience. And wouldn't that be interesting to look at? And I don't think every film should do this, but I think 1 in 100 should be allowed to. Um, so I would like some more. Is any of that make any sense to you?
It
Because you're a very
does.
smart academic man. I'm just trying to like I don't I'm not trying to throw woo woo at you. I'm trying to actually like meet you where you're at.
I get that. And I'm trying to figure out, oh, I'm just thinking about other films that have sort of attempted it. Ben Wheatley's done it a couple of times at the Field in England
Yeah.
and in the Earth. And beyond that,
We don't get it in English language. I've been writing a bit. I've been actually just written an article about mythopoetics. I'm talking about mythopoetic storytelling,
mhm,
in a way, and you get that in Eastern Europe and you get that in Asia. You got like Apichatpong, where Safakol is doing those kind of films,
that's
right?
exactly what I was about to say. I was thinking about Uncle Boonmee and the fungible.
Yes. Yeah. So these there are filmmakers in world cinema who have created a pocket where you can go and watch their films and you are transported into a more of a sensorial, fable-like spiritual realm. These aren't necessarily films that have a religious side, but they have a mysterious soul to them. But it's very strange that in our English language cultures, we don't have much of that. And what I've encountered with Rabbit Trap is, um, like I said, one of the interesting ways that it's split audiences is there are people who have written, like I'm receiving daily letters from people saying how much the movie has kind of made them feel, helped them feel seen and heard, and that they go, oh, finally someone gets it, like that kind of the don't want to use the wrong words, but that it just moves them because it's finally, people are saying it's finally doing the thing. It's doing that thing that I can't express and I wish people would express. And then there are those who say, oh no, but it doesn't resolve in a rational way, or it doesn't do thing, explain stuff away. You must have made an error. Um, and or if they don't think I've made an error, they think I've made a choice that is somehow an affront to all things good and civilized in this world. And I hope I'm not trying to destroy anything. I don't know. I don't know. What do you think about this? The kind of rational discourse around, um,
Irrational storytelling.
yeah, basically rational storytelling. And why is there not more of it in English language?
I don't know. I think,
As in, why is there not stories that break it? It's viewed as a mistake.
yeah. I agree. People are hostile to this sort of narrative far more often than they should be, and I'm probably guilty of it myself here and there. But I suspect it is a lack of literacy, not culturally exactly, but if you are primarily watching English language cinema, you're almost certainly watching Hollywood movies, and those films are
Mhm.
formulaic and mechanical, and for 100 years have defined the type of narrative that people have come to quote unquote enjoy, right? Not expect, but
Yeah.
demand. If that is all you know, if that's all you've been raised on, you won't develop a palate for anything else. And I'm incredibly lucky in that I had a VCR when I was a kid, and I mean I was around when it all started. I'm old enough to remember when you couldn't, if you missed something on television, you never saw it again,
Wow. Yeah.
which was horrible. My first experience of most horror movies and fantasy cinema was in books, reading about them,
Yeah.
and then
Okay.
catching up to them. And I think that's maybe why I can appreciate older things, because I have the context of I've read the books that were written at the time, and so I know
Yeah. Okay.
how people were ready to receive them or weren't ready to receive them, and can appreciate the work that they did. Even people now saying they don't watch black and white movies because nothing's black and white in the world, and that doesn't speak to them. That's just,
It's
I
so
mean,
that's to me. It's for me terrifying.
it's
Like
internet
not
shit
just
hosting,
about
right?
like
But it
on
is
a
the disintegration of the
yeah
idea of accepting something new.
yeah, and also accepting something that is non-literal,
Mm-hmm.
like whether that's visually or sonically or like story wise. I think the lack of non-literal art, or the rejection of non-literal art is a bit of a problem because it's the benefit of engaging with art that doesn't explain itself fully, or art that is not entirely rational or not entirely literal, is that it helps work this muscle inside of you that can deal with irrational forces, which might be people, because spoiler alert, most of us are fucking mad and not entirely rational most of the time, and yet we have this illusion that we are, and I think that's one of them. And there are there are mechanisms in this world that are way too complex for us as little individuals to wrap our head around, and we don't. And we become angry about it, and then we try to control it, and then we rally together and we try to suppress things that we don't understand. And I think these are symptoms of a culture that have not learnt to accept mystery or to be humble in the face of something that you don't fully understand. Maybe you never will. And instead of going, I must understand it, to go, whoa, I don't understand this. Okay. How do I feel about that? That's scary. It's scary. Why is it scary? Because I'm not in control. Why don't I, why do I need to be in control? Oh God. And hopefully you go on a process internally and you reach some kinds of peace and openness to connection with others to share the load of this great mystery, that is culture, society, existence, and so on. And I think non-literal art, non-literal films and storytelling has a role to play in helping train that muscle, which creates a kind of a cultural humility. Um, maybe, I don't know. I remember seeing Nick Cave perform a few years ago in Sydney, and he talked a lot about mystery, and that really, like, he's a smart man. He's lived a life. He's had some fucking insane loss and great gains in his life, and he's been through a lot. And he says that the older he's got, the less he understands, and the more he's learned to accept and enjoy mystery, not just accept it, but to find humanity there or to find love there. You know, I love it. I love that idea. It's terrifying to me. Like, I'm like everyone. I hate mystery. I want to solve it immediately. And I'm trying really hard to stop that impulse. You know?
Yeah.
Like I think about mystery and crime dramas that I used to think, oh, people love mystery stories. It's like, no, people love mystery stories because they hate mysteries. Because they want to see the mystery solved. And then they can leave and not have to worry about it.
Yeah. It's
which is
the
precisely where,
yeah, it's the reestablishment of order that appeals to people.
Yeah, which is such an illusion in our lives, you know. But yeah. Yeah, man. I'm trying to not sound like too much of a stoner or something, but
no, it's fine. We don't.
I appreciate you letting me ramble.
I don't think that's rambling at all. It's I think it's kind of the essential question. And I can be a cynic and still appreciate my essential powerlessness, both as as a citizen of a country that is completely at the mercy of our neighbor to the south if they decide to. And also, the fact that the people I love will get sick and die at some point, or I will get sick and die first. And there's nothing that can be done about any of it other than, believing that you can help each other through these moments. But that's it, right? I mean, you can't control anything other than your own actions. And even then, it's maybe 75-25.
Yeah. And how much we're really in control of. Yeah.
Yeah. And accepting that is the first step in opening yourself up to literally everything else.
Yeah.
So there. Ha! I am an optimist.
Ha! I think you are. No, it's good.
Damn it.
Oh, no.
My thanks to Bryn Chainey, whose eerie first feature, Rabbit Trap, is now available on digital and on demand across North America. Watch it with the lights off and the sound up. Thanks also to Alya Stationwala. She knows what she did. You can find Bryn on Instagram at chinbrainy, all one word, ChinBrainey, and you can find Whistle and I'll Come to You on DVD in the first volume of the BFI's Ghost Stories Classic Adaptations from the BBC series. It's also streaming on Shudder in the US and Canada, and available at the Internet Archive. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 41 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, get all the boosters, enjoy your candy. I'll see you next week.